Hello, welcome to 1080's second event around Learning at Work Week, where we'll be looking at leading in a hybrid world. So I want to welcome Liz, my colleague Liz Oseland today, who will be talking us through that. Hello, Liz.
Lovely. Thank you for the introduction there, Hannah, and a big thank you to 1080 putting on these sessions this week. Fantastic opportunity for everybody to think about how they can learn through this Learning at Work week. Big believer that every day is a school day. I'm thinking that there are some things in the session today that maybe you already know, but might be a good reminder for you, but also for some of you who are leading teams, some new things and takeaways to think about as well. So yeah, I'm a 1080 career coach and trainer and facilitator, working with all sorts of different clients around the world. So I'll be sharing some of my experience as well of me working with teams and things, I've had to ramp up or consider working and leading those teams as well. So I think the plan is we're going to be roughly about an hour, aren't we, Hannah? It depends how interactive it is and whether you have questions. So please do put comments and questions in the live stream here. We'll do our best to answer them. Also, if you haven't had a chance, Joan Connor from 1080 did a fantastic session yesterday on leading with purpose. And I think that flows nicely into today's session about leading in a hybrid world, because for me, if there's two main things as a leader that you need to be thinking about in this space, it is around being really clear on your purpose, your own personal one. And you can go and check out Joan's LinkedIn Live, either through LinkedIn or through the 1080 YouTube. Thinking about, as a leader, your own purpose, but also you leading in a hybrid world. What is the purpose for you and your team going forward in this space? And I think the other one as well is leading with empathy. So these aren't necessarily new things or new concepts, but it's a good reminder, and also almost like if you imagine a magnifying glass or a telescope, it's about amplifying these skills that we may already be aware of. I'm going to make it as interactive as I can in this space. I'm going to give you moments to pause and reflect, moments to think about some things in your own time. So please maybe catch up and listen again, and by all means share it with your teams as well. So this is essentially what we're going to cover off, looking at this idea of the new normal, creating in a connected world, engaging with your team, how you can communicate and collaborate, onboarding teams. And what I mean by onboarding teams is both new people that might be joining your teams, but onboarding as in this is the new normal, the new ways of working, and then looking at how we can create that future with opportunity for questions. And with regard to the Learning at Work week, there are some themes that they're suggesting people look at throughout this week when delivering sessions. And I think the two that struck out for me were the two that they had, which was uncovering hidden powers. And that's almost what you need to embrace as a leader. This is new and charted waters for a lot of us. And you've got some superpowers. And maybe this session will sort of unravel what some of those skills and strengths are for both you and your team. And also uncover new dimensions. This is new for all of us. We're all navigating what we're supposed to be doing, what's working well and what isn't. So again, another opportunity just to reflect and say, okay, how can I uncover these new dimensions and ways of working? So you may have heard of hybrid working. We'll have a look at, well, what is even this hybrid working thing? It is the new normal. It's also being referred to as that. We've had the pandemic for 2 years. There is the push to return back to the office, looking at a mix of remote working and face-to-face working. I think what we need to be mindful of as well, there's another term that's going around the internet at the moment, which is remote capable work. Not all working environments can be hybrid. I'm working with food manufacturing at the moment. It's not an option. People have to be physically face to face. So it is something to be conscious of, that your environment you're working in now may enable remote working, but not all environments do. So if you change jobs or you have team members coming in from other environments, this genuinely may still be quite a new term for them. I'm not going to read all the statistics off the slide. Google it yourself. There are some fantastic and really interesting statistics out there at the moment as to where are we in the world with regard to hybrid working. It's essentially coming down to around 50%. You see there 42% currently work in a hybrid model. But moving forward, there is an expectation that that might increase. And currently 9 in 10 remote capable employees prefer some degree of remote work flexibility. So for those who have been able to work remotely, it is something that they are looking for going forward. And 6 in 10 actually specifically prefer this hybrid working model, this flexibility of sometimes working from home or remotely, and sometimes face-to-face. So this will change, the landscape will change as we settle back into the hybrid model or being back in the workplace face-to-face. But it is something to be mindful of in the sense of the trends and what people are looking for. Particularly with, we're going to end the session on, the great resignation, the great reset, the great reshuffle, again, different terminology, different language, because it is important to know how are people feeling, what do they want in terms of retaining that talent, which is, a really important factor when we're leading our teams. So what does hybrid working really mean then? Good question, really good question. And I'm going to ask you now to take a moment and just think for asking for yourself, what does hybrid working really mean to you? What does it mean to you? And your perception of it when you ask your teams, what is hybrid working, might be completely different. And I think that is the point. It's not a sort of one size fits all. Your perception, your desires, your wants, your needs might be very, very different from what your team are interested in or sharing with you. It will change from company to company depending on cultures, location, if you've got dispersed teams. So before you even do anything, I would just take that reflection moment to go, what does it mean for me? And not to make those assumptions that because that's what hybrid working means to me, that it does mean the same for my teams. Hannah, I don't know if you've got any thoughts or reflections on that. What's hybrid working really meaning for you at the moment?
So it's a really good question. And I think, so for me, it's much more around being flexible to mine and my team's needs. So it's really important to me that I can have that balance. And I think, so I suppose for me, in answer, it really is around that balance and flexibility, not necessarily working from home either, actually. And one of the things that it has shown me is it's nice to do, but actually it's not as important as I first thought. So you're right, it's definitely this piece around giving it that more thought.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, really simple question, but one if we don't answer right at the beginning, we're going to get ourselves in a real pickle in the sense of, what's coming next when we're actually leading these teams. Okay. So I think for me, it's about, as Hannah was saying, that it's about being flexible, adaptable. So some of the things that you agree now or communications that you have in your team may change based on feedback of it working well or not going forward into the future. But I think the outcomes are, it's got to be fair, it's got to be consistent, and you've got to ensure that productivity and efficiency in a connected environment. And I think that is the key point when you're looking at creating hybrid worlds. What does that connected environment also look like? It's a mix of both the digital space and the physical space. And getting the best of both worlds and getting the best out of individuals and collectively as a team. Because all of us now, we want to work in a place that produces the best outcomes for us. So for me, Liz, for Hannah as an individual, we want to have some autonomy over where and when, how am I doing that work? And that's great. And that's a fantastic way to empower your teams. However, we've got to think about that fairness and consistency piece. And also, does that fit in with our working culture? So we've got to think then collectively, how does that work for the team? How does that work for our organisations and ultimately our customers? I think the great opportunity here, though, is that it is an opportunity to break old habits. We don't want to return to that sort of mindset of, well, it's always been done that way. If we're thinking in that mode still of, but that's how we did it 2.5 years ago, that doesn't necessarily mean it's right. So heuristics are almost like mental shortcuts, and they're there for a very good reason. It's to help us improve our decision making in a fast way, because there's some repetitiveness to it. There's reasons why things have happened that way in the past. But if we're stuck there and not questioning it, it means we're in actually a very reactive thinking mode. Now, we're all super busy and can be very much caught up in that culture of busyness. But this almost is that opportunity to rewrite the rules. Just because that's the way we did 2.5 years ago doesn't mean the elements of returning to the office will be the same. And there are those assumptions that we make without checking in with ourselves and our teams. Is that what we really, really want? So with regard to the new normal, I think it is an opportunity to have a bit of a mindset shift. We can look and reevaluate the ways of working, both digitally and face-to-face. And more importantly, moving away from this idea of presenteeism. That's what it's been coined, presenteeism. If you cast your mind back to pre-pandemic, the 9 to 5, 8 till 6, whatever your working pattern was, and a feeling that to be seen to be productive, to be seen to be efficient, I have to physically have my face and body in the building. And I would hope for most companies and cultures, we've moved away from that, but there still is an element of that. Now, we're going to go into the pros and cons of digital and face-to-face in a moment, but just that whole mindset of you're only doing your good work if you're in the office, I would all hope that we've moved a little bit further along from that. So if we're going to move away from that reactive thinking of, well, that's what we did before, so when we come to the office, this is what it's going to look like, this is how we used to work and behave, whichever days it is you're in, we have to work that way, isn't necessarily going to be the most efficient going forward. So again, linking back on Joan's session yesterday, there's some great work from Simon Sinek around the purpose and why. So yes, asking for yourself in terms of being a purposeful leader, but also that bigger question of, why are we doing it this way? What is the whole purpose? What is the outcome for us doing it this way? Now, you can start by answering yourself as a leader to get some insight into that. But the best way, again, is to open it up and ask your teams. So another thing when you're creating a hybrid world and leading in it is, how can we keep connected? Now, there is the beauty of technology these days, and even if we'd had the pandemic 10 years ago, it would have been very, very different in the sense of how effective or productive we may have been based on the technology that was available. But again, there can be a lot of assumptions there around our ways of working. So there's a very simple model called 5W1H, and the questions are on the screen here. So who, what, where, when, why, and how. So hopefully you've got some pen and paper to hand. I'm going to ask you just to do your own mini brainstorming session now, because a lot of our anxieties are driven by the things that we don't know. So if there's any changes of any sort, not just to do with hybrid working, the anxiety around that is because we're making assumptions. We haven't got the information to hand. We don't know the facts. And human nature, for whatever reason, is for some reason we don't go and ask the right questions to go and turn those assumptions into facts. So just by yourselves, what questions have you got under those headers around leading in a hybrid world or hybrid environment? There could be multiple elements to that. What are the expectations of me as a leader? Where are people expected to work? When are they going to be working? Even as your core hours, have they changed? And, spend some more time outside of this session as well. Don't look for the answers yet, because this is where we jump into reactiveness. Just get down all the questions that are buzzing around in your head. Who in my team has enjoyed working at home? Who in my team is desperate to come back to the office? Get as many questions as you can down. Your job then after this session with more time and reflection is to go and find out the answers in whichever way that you need to turn those assumptions into facts. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to jot some thoughts down there.
And Liz, I mean, should I quickly run through the things that I've pulled off for me?
Please, yeah.
So it's a really good model and I like it. So it's who. So can everyone do it, or is it just singular? Do I need to do it case by case? What does it look like? What does it look like, not just for the team, but for the business? Where? So practically, where can they work? Is there allowances needed for those who can't be at home but want to be? When? When is my client's biggest need? When do I need the team to be around? Why? Why and what benefit will this bring to my team and the motivation and their engagement? And then the big question, how do I make that work for everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a fantastic start. And with more time, you'll probably get a whole load more questions under each of these answers. And what you're writing down there, Hannah, might be completely different for somebody in financial services over, I don't know, working to the NHS or wherever, because it is case by case and working culture. But there's no right or wrong to this at all. But if you as the leader have got questions that are unanswered, then also think about your team. There's likely that they've got tenfold more questions that they've got. So again, you can do this activity by yourself to get some clarity so that when you are communicating about the changes, how you're going to be working together as a team, the expectations then of you as a leader going forward, because there will be changes in how you're leading over being in a face-to-face environment. You can then share this model with your teams. Because if there's any anxiety, we know that is going to cause longer term issues. There'll be breakdown in communications, possibly some silo working, resentment over why things are being done a particular way, resistance to physically coming back to the office or vice versa. So I think by having those almost open, candid conversations around, look, I've done this activity for myself, so here I am honestly sharing all the things that I found out, but what are your questions? Shows this essence again of leading with purpose, being clear on your why, and leading with empathy, because you're showing you're being available and also interested in what they have to hear. Now, you might not have all the answers, the company might not still have all the answers, but at least they've been voiced, they can be parked and sort of said, look, that's a really good question and we generally don't know yet, and that is generally something we need to be thinking about, get back to you, whatever the response might be. So do think about this model in a little bit more detail. And another activity you can do for yourself and also with your team, again, to get an insight as to where they are. Because again, we may have assumptions that, for example, Hannah, you have loved and thrived working, from home throughout the pandemic. So I'm going to make an assumption that you want to keep it that way 5 days a week because that suits you. Without having that conversation, I don't know, you might say, I'm absolutely tearing my hair out. I've got kids running around the place. We've had conversations, haven't we? But, I just love that opportunity to decompress, going on in the tube, into the office, whatever it might be. So we're back to this idea of don't make assumptions, start those conversations and find out. Very simple activity again, but vastly underrated, pros and cons. Sit down for yourself and say, what are the pros for me working in the office? And what are the pros for me working remotely? Some examples on the screen there, not necessarily right or wrong, but a pro of working in the office might be that you've got generally faster internet connection. You have and will enjoy that collaboration with others. Those what's referred to as the water cooler moments. You can't create that at home where you're popping to the coffee, you're in the lift, getting you water and you bump into somebody and you share ideas or, cross information across departments. But what else? What else for you are pros of working in an office? Same for remotely. Well, actually, I'm more productive at home because I have less interruptions. My work-life balance is better. And when you've got all the pros down, then you can start looking at, okay, if they are the pros, what's the next step? The next step is, how can I maximize those pros to focus on the positives? And again, what your pros are might be very different to your team. This is another model, again, to open up conversations with your team, because again, there might be some real surprises in there, and actually some real gems of information for you to make that environment more productive when people are in the office. And then you go over, you do the same. Okay, well, what are the cons of working in the office? What are the cons of remote working? Again, will be vastly different depending on your culture and individual. But, you know, the office cons might be your commute time. You don't want to be involved in that again. There could genuinely be some health and safety considerations. Everybody is on very different pages at the moment in the sense of how they feel about COVID, still catching it, what the implications may be, and it might not be an option for them. You know, there might be more distractions, but what else? Remote cons, well, you know, your home setup might still not allow for an actual desk and a zone where you can work quietly. Your internet might be slower, you know, just the general loneliness and lack of interaction. So again, once you've got the cons down for yourself and also your team, next step, okay, well, how can we minimize that? Because the idea of hybrid working is that it is going to be a bit of both. There's going to be some home time, there's going to be some office time. So by laying it bare and having it all written down, you can then address those issues and within your power, resources and everything else say, we heard what you said about coming into the office and not having quiet time. We've now got dedicated quiet spaces, or whatever it might be that you're able to do within the parameters of your workplace. So again, I'm just going to give you a moment. You can start this activity for yourselves. Just jot down a few ideas for pros and cons for both. Any jump out for you, Hannah? One for the office.
So the office for me is, I love being with people, and I didn't realise how much I'd missed it till it wasn't there. So I really miss those water cooler moments and just hustle and bustle of the office. So that was a definite pro to being in the office. A con is the travel time, you know, but it's also a con. It's a pro and a con, because it gives me that time to think the travel time, but also then it takes away from precious time in the day. So, exactly. You know, I think I'm a massive fan for pro and con lists. This helps me to get my thinking down.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so creating this hybrid environment then. So it is the mix, it's the blend of the physical office space as well as the virtual world, remote world of home. And it's this idea then of building destinations. You know, there's got to be a reason to be in the office. There's got to be a reason for working virtually or remotely. And when you're building these destinations, some of the things that you can think about when you're leading in that hybrid environment is, and an absolute essential one that I'm very passionate about, is you've got to live the culture that you want to see. Whoever I've worked with, whenever I've managed people, I said, I want to create a team that everybody else looks at us and we are smashing all our targets, we're being very productive and efficient, but we're having fun. And people look from the outside and go, I want to go and play on that team. So there is an element of thinking around, what is that culture? What do people hear and see and feel from you, both in the remote world and also in the physical world? And that also is about leading with empathy, with purpose, having the time to start these conversations with your team. It's also about having protected, productive time, which we'll talk about shortly in the session, and employee-centric return to work plans. That simply means having the conversations, not having a one-size-fits-all, having very, very clear policies, being available to communicate it and being fair and consistent. It's not necessarily about each employee will get exactly what they want, because that's not possible. But but at least it's open, transparent and fair. Have those policies available, as we said, but also recognise skills and strengths, which we'll look at the moment. And where possible, again, depends on budgets and resources. But if you haven't already, it's investing in digital transformation and looking at agile methodologies, what technology works for you. There is so much out there at the moment. Again, have a bit of a play, try and get freebies to see, can we test this out for a couple of weeks with our team and road test things to see what works. But there's so much to help us be connected in that digital world that is worth having a look, particularly around sort of visualization, so that, you know, if you're in the office and you've got flip charts and whiteboards, that's all replicated online now. And actually for me is better because it doesn't get lost. It doesn't go into the next meeting and somebody flips that flip chart over and you go, oh, I forgot to take it with me. So again, there's pros and cons to everything. But when you're in that physical space, the focus has to be on that in-person collaboration. And the office environment itself has to be stimulating. You know, we've been at home for a long time, but as I said, you've got to walk in that office and really want to be there and have the zones that you want. And essentially, you're looking at impacts-driven results from work at both in the digital space and the physical space. So before I move on, have we got any questions from anyone, Hannah?
We don't at the moment, Liz, no.
No, carry on, it's fine. So the other thing to think about is how we're going to engage with your team. So we touched on there the importance of looking at skills and strengths. So again, if you feel comfortable to, you can start this by yourself. See how does it feel to do this as an activity for you, and then you can sit down with your teams. Now, this may well be something that you've already done, conversations that have been ongoing or conversations from when they first joined your team, looking at not necessarily skills and knowledge. There is an element to that in the sense of qualifications and aspirations and things like that, but more than that, it's almost like behaviors and attributes. So, you know, somebody may be like super patient. They haven't necessarily got that in their job description or on their CV, but that patience is a strength in itself over another team member. So look for around 4 strengths. There could be more, there could be less. But, you know, what is the strength? What benefit does it bring to me? What benefit does that bring to the team, your organization, and ultimately your customers and clients? Because the beauty of us as human beings is that we are all unique. So I would hope that when you do this activity with your team, you'd have a nice balance of a complete mix of different strengths from your teams. And what you need to do then is establish those skills and strengths and how you can allow your team members to play to those strengths. So there could be a little bit of a reshuffle, not necessarily in job descriptions or roles, more I'm thinking around how you set them up in this hybrid world. So if somebody's strength is all around the detail, for example, you know, give them a document and they miss every full stop, inverted comma, whatever it might be. But to do that best work, they obviously need peace and quiet. Knowing that, then you can shape their work pattern going forward, that potentially then is the type of work that you keep for home working. Because for most people, it would be quiet. It would be more productive rather than deadline when you're in the office Wednesday, 4 o'clock, I need that report looked at, knowing their strength is quiet time to be able to do it at home. So it's very simple things that we may be aware of, but how can we reshuffle it in the hybrid environment? And then from that comes some exciting stuff. There could be some things you didn't know about your team, perceptions of their strengths, or when you feedback what their strengths are, becomes a real motivator for them that, wow, I didn't, realize you noticed that about me. Again, this idea of leading with empathy. So what new opportunities, might there be in the hybrid world to use your strengths? What are the challenges that might exist for you not to be able to demonstrate and use those strengths? And how can that help when you're organising the hybrid world? So again, let's say that somebody is a natural coordinator of people. You know, in your hybrid world, you might need to put a bit more emphasis on how are people connecting, both physically when they're face to face, and I mean in a social context now, not necessarily just through work, but also the virtual coffee catch-up idea in the virtual world as well. You're not going to give that to organise to the person who would just die a death and hates doing anything with people and would just rather not bother, because it's not going to happen. But there will be somebody in your team who loves that and would relish in the idea of organising this once a month or whatever it might be. And as I said, these are almost things that fall out of job description, but keep that team connected and helps you as the leader to lead. You know, everything doesn't have to be on you. And when you get a handle of what those strengths are, can make a massive difference, not just to the way you lead, but also that team collaboration. So again, I'm just going to give you a couple of moments to do a small reflection on what do you think some of your own strengths are? And then you can look at some of those questions. How does that benefit you, your team, your organisation, and leading in a hybrid world? And going on from strengths, another important aspect to this is also getting a handle on what motivates you personally and also what motivates your team. And essentially, we're driven by three motivators, you know, our needs and expectations at work. So we've got the intrinsic satisfaction. So that's like your own personal development and how you set challenges and things like that. Then you've got economic rewards. You're coming to work because of what you're getting paid and, you know, salary benefits, potential bonuses and things like that. Or you're coming to work for social relationships. So it's building those relationships with customers, working together as a team. Now, it's not to say that you might be a blend of all three, maybe two, but there's usually one that will be our preference. Again, this may well be a conversation that you've had with your team and you've got a very good handle on what gets them out of bed in the morning and why they come to do their own very specific job under you as a leader and for the company. Or it might not be a conversation that you've had. So again, spending time to think for you personally what your motivators are will change how you lead, and finding out what the motivators of your team are. And there's a great, very simple model called the 5 whys. So it was initially developed for like root cause of problems in manufacturing lines. So, you know, used for big companies in Japan and, you know, car manufacturing and things like that. But it has been translated into more of a human level. And you can start with the very simple question of what gets you out of bed in the morning? Other than a cup of tea and going to the toilet, we'll take that as given, okay? But why do you get out of bed in the morning? And you can explain that, look, whatever I hear, I'm a bit like an annoying 4-year-old, I'm just going to keep on going and I'm going to ask you why 5 times. But when we get to the 5th, it's like a real guttural response of, and quite emotional. And you might find that around the 3rd why, there's a big pause because you are getting deep. And people are really stopping and thinking of, yeah, why do I get out of bed in the morning? Now, this again may be something they know about themselves, but on an individual level, it can be really empowering. It could be that, you know, their reason for getting out of bed is because family is the most important thing to them. That gives you valuable information as a leader when you are looking at the hybrid world and shaping where are they going to be working and how, when. If they're saying that their number one motivator and why they get out of bed in the morning and why they exist is to be with their family, and you don't satisfy those desires, they're not going to be motivated at work. And what the answers will be for each individual will be vastly different. So yes, as a leader, we have to have the time to have these conversations, the patience to, assimilate all the information. Again, this isn't about favoritism. This isn't about every employee is going to get absolutely everything that they want, but it's about being open, transparent, having the conversations, leading with empathy, and being consistent and fair. So for those people who are sharing things with you and you find out about them shaping their work environment within your best power to accommodate that. And if you haven't checked out any of her work yet, I highly recommend you do. She's got podcasts, books. I think she's the #1 biggest TED speaker ever, Brené Brown. And she talks a lot around vulnerability and daring greatly. And I love this quote by her. It says, "Daring greatly means the courage to be vulnerable. It means to show up and be seen, to ask for what you need, to talk about how you're feeling, and to have the hard conversations." So when I opened the session talking about leading in a hybrid world, is doing all the best bits that you do in the sense of being a leader and amplifying it. The added element are these leading with purpose and leading with empathy. We are not necessarily going to get it right. Changes with COVID or anything else may reappear in the autumn, the Christmas, we don't know. So there does have to be that element of courageous to be vulnerable, to say, right now, this is the plan, but I'm not going to say to you 100%, this is how it's going to stay for the next 12 months. Your team will appreciate your honesty and courageous and vulnerability in that space. The courageousness and vulnerability to share your own pandemic stories. So again, without delving too much into personal things, and people might not want to share, but there is an element of consolidation going on here. If this is the first time that we're coming together face to face, everybody's pandemic stories are vastly different, from real heartbreaking stories to those who flourished and loved it and don't now want anything to change 2 years on. But if we don't open up and share with permission how we're feeling about it in those stories, then we can't have that courage to make it different going forward. It means to be shown up and be seen, not this idea of presenteeism in the office. Show up and be seen, and I'm here, I've got you back. I am your leader. I'm going to be consistent. I'm going to be fair. We're not going to go back to the old ways of working just because that's the way it was. An opportunity to rewrite the rules. I'm going to be available and ask you these questions of what you need. What are your assumptions? Let's turn them into facts. What are the pros and cons in the hybrid world? What are your strengths? How can I help you to shine? What are your motivators and why you get out of bed in the morning? And talk about how you're feeling. Fantastic now with mental health awareness. I think we are in a very different space. But again, in the hybrid world, already we're making this assumption in the UK specifically, back to normal. Lots of families aren't back to normal. They're still catching COVID. Their children are being sent home from school and having to isolate from COVID. And there is, again, a bit of an assumption of everybody's back to normal. And actually, we're not. So if you're struggling, we need to have those conversations. So yeah, just a whole amazing quote. Absolutely love her. Go and check her out and have a look at her books and podcasts. But I think quite pertinent when we're looking at this idea of leading in the hybrid world. So another element we need to really think about to be effective is communicating to collaborate. And across both spaces. Now, this is a model that you may have seen before. It's referred to as the Shannon Weaver communications model. Now, I used to bang the drum about this model pre-pandemic. It's become even more important, I think, since the pandemic. And again, not necessarily rocket science. It's just something we don't take a moment to think in our culture of busyness, and we're firing off emails and picking up the phone really quickly, and we don't stop and think about how can I be as effective as I can be in this communications and conversation. So very quickly, in a nutshell, For example, right now, I'm the sender of this information. I am encoding everything that I need to say to you around what are the best ways to lead in a hybrid world. The channel we've chosen is LinkedIn Live. I'm verbalizing. I'm also showing you some slides. We're having a little bit of a virtual discussion. And you're sitting there listening to this now, making sense of everything I'm saying. Now, we believe right now for how we want to share this particular webinar and the Leading at Work week, that is the best channel. This is the best way to do this to maximise the audience and participation. But on top of that, for all of you, there will be some noise, as in barriers to how you're receiving this information. Let's face it, it's lunchtime. You might be hangry. You might be thinking, I really, really, really wanted to listen to Liz and 1080 for this, but my tummy's rumbling and you've almost lost me a little bit. And these are the things that we need to think about when we're communicating. Again, having conversations with our team. How do you best like to be communicated? I'm an email person. Make a little note, right? Note to self, email for Hannah. Bob, how do you best like to be communicated with? Oh, I much prefer phone call. Call me. If I don't answer, I'll reply as soon as I can. Again, it makes a massive difference to your efficiency in how you lead in a hybrid world and being open and transparent with those preferences. But again, is the channel right? Is email best? Maybe, because I've got a mix of people in the office and at home. Is this communication so important, loaded with emotion, confidential, that I need everybody physically in this office to hear these communications, non-negotiable? Then that is my channel. So again, it's taking a moment to think, what is the best way for me to communicate? And on top of that, how can I remove the distractions? It's too hot, it's too cold. I've got two people who are remote, everyone else is in the office. How is that going to make them feel? Is that going to cause noise and a barrier of feeling isolated because everybody else is physically there and they're the only two that are not? So a good little check-in activity to get the best out of your communications when you're leading in a hybrid world. And again, not a new one, but one of my all-time favorites. You may, sure you'll be aware of SMART when setting objectives. Is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it achievable, realistic, and time-bound? But again, we can take it a step further. Are my communications smart? Hands up, the amount of times that I've sent instructions in an email to a team member, they come straight back within a couple of minutes going, Liz, when do you want it by? I haven't added T timely. I haven't said when I want it by. That's not me being efficient. That's not them being efficient. It's wasting everybody's time because I've been reactive and I haven't taken that moment to think, have I got everything covered off that I need to? So again, this is a type of thinking that you can empower your team. Take a moment. Is it the right method and channel? And have you got everything in there that you need? Absolutely be available for questions and feedback, but we don't want a flurry going on by email or in a virtual space because you're not being clear on what your communications are. So have you got any reflections on that one, Hannah?
I'm the same as you, Liz. So I think SMART is brilliant and I use it in terms of my planning. I'm not so good when I'm communicating. I think, like you said, you're in the moment and you're pinging off. And I always think one of the things I do is I work to what works best for me. So I would ping emails out, but it may not be it's the best way to receive. But I do really like this idea of adding SMART to my communications. I think it would be a really useful exercise.
Yeah. Good, thank you. And on that as well, like the Shannon Weaver model, let's say now, people are out physically a lot more. What if you do call somebody in their car and you're giving them a whole load of information? They need that bravery as a receiver to say, I am listening to you, but I'm going to forget half of this. Please, can you send me an email, without the sender having to say, I will send you an email. So there are those responsibilities both ways with your team to really tighten up those communications so it doesn't get lost. Yeah. So when we're communicating as well, we all have what's called time bandits. Things that steal our time. We can almost go back to the who, what, where, when, why, and how again, which is pretty much what we've got on the screen here. But again, it's having these open conversations, you know, who's stealing my time? What's stealing my time? When are these time bandits happening? You know, why am I still allowing it to happen? When am I maybe being a time bandit? And again, once we iron all this out, we'll probably find that these are what have already popped up with the pros and cons of, you know, working at home and working remotely. But again, by having that honesty piece on the table, as the leader, you can address it. But as the team, get them to collectively be responsible for it and call each other out. Look, we agreed when I was working at home, I was only contactable on email between, I don't know, whatever it is, 10 and 2 in the afternoon. And you kept calling me and asking me for this and stealing my time. That was my what's called protected, you know, productive time. So again, nothing new necessarily, but having that courageous conversation and being open and transparent about it. And when we're structuring our day as well, you can go and find out more about this. Brian Tracy has developed it in a lot more detail. He's got a book called Eat That Frog, but it's the idea of don't procrastinate. So if you eat a live frog first thing every morning, and nothing worse will happen to you for the rest of the day. Meaning, procrastination is when we put off things that are the big, hairy, horrible things that we don't want to do. And we go, oh, just clear those 10 emails that are in my email box. And then it gets to lunchtime and then something else pops in and somebody else asks you, and then it's like 4 o'clock and all of a sudden this big thing that you knew you should have done first thing you didn't do is there, and it's bigger and it's uglier. And actually all the things that you feel like you've been productive of working throughout the day, you haven't been efficient with them because you've been preoccupied with the big frog that you need to do. When I was working for a company in Australia, this was our language. We literally would come in the morning, make a cup of tea, say good morning, sit down, and it was almost like a hand up or a little thing on our desk going, eat my frog. And it was the permission to say, this is my productive time. This is my most important, most urgent thing that I need to work on today, and I'm doing it first thing. So again, it's acknowledging, what are those big things that is your first thing in the morning? Let's get it done. And again, collectively as a team, supporting each other with that. And as part of that comes this accountability. So I've sort of mentioned that throughout, that yes, you are the leader, but the more accountability and empowerment you can give to your team will actually help you do your job easier. It doesn't always have to be led by the manager or the leader. And one way that you can do that is by establishing something called team norms. It's almost like the unwritten contract, the unwritten rules of how we behave. So in an ideal world going forward, if we were going to clean the slate as our team, what do I like? What do I wish? And what if? And it goes back to what we started with. If we've got this beautiful position now where we can reevaluate and rewrite the rules for your team in the digital space and physical space, what are people going to see, hear, and feel from you? Again, this idea of living the culture that you want to see, hold each other accountable. Little things like, connecting and acknowledging and saying good morning every morning to each other as a team. Now, when you're physically in the office, that's really easy. Good morning, and you're walking by the desks. But in a hybrid world, that becomes more complicated. But consciously thinking about it, how do we say our good mornings in a hybrid world, and consciously acting on it will suddenly start making people more connected. And if you don't get your good morning response either physically in the office or for somebody virtual, then there's your red flag to go and check in. Oh, we haven't heard from them. Is everything okay? So very, very small, again, not rocket science, simple things, but you can have written as part of your team that collectively as a team you can embrace. So just take a moment to reflect. What are some of the things that you would like as part of your unwritten rules of the way you're behaving? And when you're onboarding teams, this might be a mix of onboarding. It might be new people, new starters that are joining your team. And you may have gone through this process and you've got your hybrid working clear. Or they might be coming in now and you're still trying to navigate the land and how you're going to work it. Again, if you want to go and find out more, it's called the Kubler Ross change curve. And without going into too much detail, it was an idea that people who were terminally ill or near the end of life or grieving after somebody who died, is that we all go through what's called the same change curve. And this has been widely adopted now in the workplace for things like big pieces of change, redundancies, or like with COVID. It was a massive change that almost required a certain level of grieving for the old ways of working and embracing the new. There's no right or wrong in this, and it's an idea that everybody will go through the change curve. The vital part is that how long it takes each individual to go through the curve will differ. So we all go with shock first, can't believe it's happening, moving into a bit of denial. Then we get frustrated, and then we'll get a bit down and depressed about it. And then we'll start experimenting a little bit onto setting the direction and then the ways forward and implementing. And how this will help you as a leader is you yourself will go through the change curve with what does this hybrid environment look like, how other people in your team are reacting to it, their expectations, whether they're embracing or not. But it's being mindful of some of the things that you may hear and see again. So if you're hearing that language of, this will never work, why can't we go back to the ways that we were working before? I'm not having this. You know they're at the beginning of their change curve. They will come through it. Your job is to support them with the right language, with the right empathy, with the right feedback to help them move on to the latter stages around, the direction and integration. And they might do a bit of a dance. They might go backwards again. But it's being mindful of where are they at, and not everybody is going to be on the curve at the same time. So as you embrace these changes, as you go forward, being mindful, being respectful, listening out for certain languages, and again, how can you support them to move through that curve? Have you got any questions about that one, Hannah? I think you're quite familiar with this one, aren't you?
Sorry, Liz. I actually don't, but Sean's asked a question, so I'm just going to pop it up for you.
Yeah.
It's quite a long one.
Okay.
So I'm reading a number of pieces of research showing GetZ in particular is happy to walk away when hybrid/remote working is not on the table, and that sectors that cannot offer this are having difficulties attracting younger people, i.e. teaching, which is very true. Mackenzie's workers 18 to 34 years old are 59% more willing to walk than older colleagues if hybrid remote working is taken away. Can leaders build in flexibility to non-office jobs to attract young talent? Which of these practices have you suggested to you? Why? Sorry, Generation Y is that. So it's a really good question, isn't it, Liz?
Yeah, and it is this thing around retaining talent. And I think, not all, we talked about this remote capable work. So I think also generations have to be mindful of environments that they're going into isn't necessarily possible to be hybrid working. So they're things that they need to educate themselves on as well going into the workforce. But where there is an assumption or expectation that, well, why can't this be hybrid? And if the company hasn't embraced it, then absolutely they're going to lose good talent. And we know that from the Great Resignation and Great Reshuffle now.
And I suppose it's that piece, isn't it? So I think there's a bit of me that thinks, yes, that's what you think you want, because that's, by the way, what I thought I wanted. We then went into a pandemic. I had to be at home all the time. I then realised, I don't want to be at home all the time. I want to mix. And yes, there are elements of jobs where you'll have to be present, and therefore maybe you'll do different types of jobs, or maybe you'll have a different setup of your career. So you'll do teaching so many days a week and then something else, you know. So I wonder if we go back to that, it's perception and just talking to people about how we could approach it differently.
And also we're just back to this banishing assumptions, isn't it, of what we think it is going to be. If we don't try it out, we don't actually know, like you said. So none of us knew whether we're going to love or hate or be in the middle somewhere with full homeworking until we were put in a position where we're able to do it. So there is an element of trying, which leads in lovely to this sort of coming to the end of the final slides around being mindful of, we're in this great reshuffle. So it is about the retaining of talent. And a great quote here by Anthony Klotz: there's now a greater ability for people to fit work into their lives instead of lives that squeeze into their work. And absolutely, that is something that we all have to embrace. And if we don't, it is going to lead to a higher intention of people leaving their current jobs. It will lead to high levels of stress and anxiety if people aren't having their needs met, and probably more silo working. And overall, lower employee engagement, well-being is going to suffer, and motivation. So, I don't think we're in a space where we can rewind the clock and just pick up from 2.5 years ago, and that is what the office now looks like. So as Abraham Lincoln said, the best way to predict the future is to create it. So really embrace that idea now. This is a fantastic opportunity to rewrite the rules that work for you, your teams, your organization, and your customers. And actually, if we do, you're more likely to be more innovative within your industry, which is obviously going to help your bottom line. Throughout all of it, though, as we said, this isn't necessarily going to be the way forever. So there is an element of what's called reflective practice. And this simple model by Driscoll is around learn from what's happening. If you get feedback from somebody saying, that meeting was awful. We had 4 people in a boardroom that were sharing a screen. We had 3 people at individual desks actually in the same building, but doing the meeting from their desk. And we had another 5 remotely. Okay. And the feedback is that just didn't work, which we're hearing a lot from clients at the moment is, all of you stop a moment. Okay, what happened? So what? And now what? Because the worst thing that you can do is send out that invite again. You trudge through all the water and everyone feels exactly the same, but you think that that is the way that you should be working in the hybrid world when you're having meetings. So factor in that time. There'll be 5 minutes, 10 minutes after new ways of working. Factor in that reflective practice for you and your team again as to what those lessons learned are, because in 3, 6, 9, 12 months and beyond, it's not going to be the same. So we all have to stay open to different perspectives, be curious, allow yourself that little bit of vulnerability, be available for your team. And as I started with the session, it's almost like dialing up all your best leadership qualities, amplify them even more. And going on from Joan's session yesterday, absolutely leading with a clear purpose and with empathy. So I'm just going to leave you with this final slide to think about. Going forward, you leading in a hybrid world, what's something that you want to do more of? What's something that you want to do better? What's something that you want to do less? And what's something that you want to do differently? So any questions from yourself, Hannah, or anybody else made any comments or questions we need to address?
I haven't, Liz, but that was a really, really excellent and informative session. So thank you so much. And I think it's definitely given us all thought. And it's one of those things that we think we're coming out, things are changing. You don't want to fall necessarily back into that, what things were before. And this flexibility is amazing. So just listening to you give us ideas and ways to think about it is brilliant. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity and enjoy the rest of Learning at Work week. And check us out on the LinkedIn Live again and YouTube and keep reflecting on what's been covered this week from 1080. So massive thank you for everyone there joining and listening today as well.
Lovely. Thanks very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.